What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the E4 Explicit Podcast. I'm Corey, and today we have researcher and scientist Robert Powell. I found Robert on the documentary series on Netflix called Encounters, which basically highlights different pieces or different incidents that happened around the world where people encountered UAPs, UFOs, and sightings. Robert's episode is number 1 on the whole series, and it blew my mind for many reasons. One is because it's the first time that I've ever seen actual data really being used to track these things from what people have seen with their own 2 eyes. It's crazy. If you haven't seen the documentary, go check it out on Netflix. If you have, we talk about that, and we talk about Commander Fravor, we talk about the Nimitz, we talk about a lot of other cases that he's dealt with. He also has a book coming out too on April 2nd, and there's a 30% coupon in the description below if you want to get it pre-order or even afterwards. Make sure you like this video, drop a comment below, and hit that bell notification so you get notified every single time I post new content. Also, give me a subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I know you like the content. I'm trying to talk to some really cool people. I got a lot of other people coming down the pipeline that are off the chart, so I'm very excited about that. Enjoy this episode of the E4 Explicit Podcast with Robert Powell. See you guys next time. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the E4 Explicit Podcast. I'm Corey, and today we have researcher and scientist Robert Powell, who I found on a Netflix show called Close Encounters. It was amazing, but before we get into that, Robert, why don't you tell the listeners and the watchers a little bit about yourself, if you could.
All right. Thanks, Corey.
Yep.
So my name's Robert Powell. A little bit on my background. I have a degree in chemistry, and I worked in the semiconductor field as an engineer and an engineering manager. And then I was able to retire early, and I've actually spent the last 17 years studying the UFO, or as it is now called, the UAP subject. And in the course of that study, in 2017, myself and 2 other individuals created what we believe is what we wanted to have was a very scientific study of the UAP subject. And so we created an organization called the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, also known as SCU, in which, by the way, we have annual conferences. And we will have a conference this year at Huntsville, Alabama, from May 31st to January 2nd. And Ross Coulthard will be our keynote speaker. So he's a very interesting character. So that's how I got into the study of, UFOs or UAP. And I probably spend, I'd say, Corey, I spend 15, 20 hours a week for the last 17 years studying and working on this subject.
Wow. So what intrigued you to go down that? 17 years ago, talking about UFOs, people were looking at you like, what's going on with this guy? Now, it's totally different, I feel like. What took you down that path?
So when I was in high school, I had read a book by Dr. J. Allen Hynek called The UFO Experience. And so the UFO experience got me interested in the subject. But I had to put it aside, right? Because, you get ready to go to college, get married, find the right girl, have a family, all this stuff. So I didn't have time for UFOs. But I was fortunate, and I was able to retire early. So then I made this list. Okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? And one of the things on the list was, check out that UFO topic and see if there was anything to it.
Right. So
that's what I did. And I started researching it. And the more I researched it, the more it became obvious to me that there was something to this. And so that's kind of how I went down the road. And whenever I get interested in the subject, whatever it is, I'm pretty dedicated to, following that path.
Right. Yeah. A little obsessive in a good way. That's interesting. So as a kid, you were, into UFOs, and you read a book, and then now you're here, and it's kind of wild because if you haven't watched the Netflix series Encounters or Close Encounters, I think that's what's called, Close Encounters, or is it Encounters?
I think it's just called Encounters.
Yeah, it's Encounters. Yeah, it's the first episode, so you don't have to go deep into the series because each episode is like a different area around the country or world that people will explain what's happened or what they've seen. and the first one is in Dublin, Texas, I believe. And and Robert here is in it, and he goes to Dublin, and he's able to. We'll talk about it. Like, you can go into detail of what you did, but I was just fascinated because I have never seen, and I've seen a lot of documentaries. I've talked to a lot of people on here, off the podcast, about UFOs and things like that, and I've never, besides like the things that you see of Commander Fravor, and like you see, the Tic Tac and all those things, like this was the first time that I've ever seen like actual data that corroborates what people actually saw on multiple occasions. And that was just like incredible. So can you explain what happened and then how you got involved into that case?
Oh, okay, yeah. So going back in history on this, so I got involved with UFOs actually in the year 2007. And the Stephenville incident that you're talking about happened in 2008. So it's only about a year after I had first got involved. Well, during that first year, I investigated cases, read cases. At that time, I was part of an organization called MUFON. And so I was studying it. And it's like, man, there's not many of these cases that are real. I don't know how long it's going to be before I run into a real good case, right? And then all of a sudden, January 2008, it comes along. I'm looking at my computer, and there's like 20 reports that come in within a 24-hour period of time. Well, I'd never seen that before, right? It's usually a report here, a report there that, comes in. But to have 20 come in, and they're all in one geographic area. So I knew that something was going on. And so that was the Stephenville event that happened on, I believe it's January 8th, 2008. So the first thing, that I did was, okay, I need to get down to Stephenville. And we put together a get-together with all the local people in Dublin, Texas, because the event happened, if you're familiar with Texas, and if you know where Dallas-Fort Worth is, well, about 70 miles, southwest of there is the city of Stephenville. And Dublin is maybe 10 minutes drive from Stephenville.
Right.
So we met there in Dublin, and there must have been, 100 people in this little building that had come to tell us about, what they saw.
Wow.
And so I interviewed various people while I was there, and the first thing I did once I left there was, well, I need to see if I can get radar data, because this had just happened, and I wanted some type of empirical data to support what the witnesses said that they had seen. So, and it took almost, I think, about a month before I got the radar data. And then it took another probably 2 months to analyze the radar data. I think it was July, and this happened in January. It was in July by the time I got the radar data. And that was the most exciting thing when I got the radar data, because the very first thing I did was I tracked these F-16s out of Fort Worth going towards Stephenville, because I did that so that I could prove to myself that I could properly analyze the radar data, right? So that way, that was a very good kind of a test case, track the F-16s. Well, once I did that, then I went to where the witnesses were physically located and the time there. And so then I look at the radar data, in the area around that witness, and I said, okay, what was there at that time in that location? And the most exciting one was Leroy Gayton, who was the constable.
Yes.
Because he had described this object south of his home, 2 miles south of it. And then he had described the F-16s, first going by his home, and then later seeing the object south of his home. And then he goes in to get it. This is kind of funny. He goes in to get his wife to say, hey, there's these UFOs out here. You got to come and look at it. And his wife's like, it's her birthday, I believe, and she's laying on the couch watching her favorite TV show. And she's like, no, I'm not coming out to look at that. And so his 9-year-old son comes out with him. And so he comes back outside, and now these objects are no longer south of his home. They're like directly overhead. And he describes these 9 to 11 lights They're just randomly moving around in the sky, just total type chaos movement. There's nothing you can see as to what they're trying to do. And then he's watching them, and then suddenly all 9 to 11 lights begin to move into synchronicity, right? They're moving together. And within, he said, 2 seconds, these lights were just gone. And they were moving towards Stephenville. And he lived in Dublin,
right,
just south of Dublin. So when I got the radar data, I knew what time he'd seen these objects south of his home. So I looked there where his house is at, and just 2 to 3 miles south of his home is an object showing up on radar. And this object just kind of, moving just slowly back and forth south of his house. And then all of a sudden you see this object just go screeching to the northeast, which is the exact direction that he described. And I calculated the speed, and the minimum speed, it could have been higher. And just so your audience knows, I said it's minimum because the radar turns every 10 seconds.
Mm.
So I'm assuming it took the full 10 seconds to get there. But it could have gotten there much quicker than 10 seconds. But even at 10 seconds, its speed was at least 1,900 miles per hour. And to do that from 0 to 1,900, that's somewhere around 8 G-forces.
Oh my God.
To move that fast, that quickly.
Wow. And also it was silent, he said.
Yeah, he said there was no noise. And, to give your audience a feel for 8 G-forces, that's like, if I'm sitting here and I weigh 150 pounds, if I have 8 G-forces, then I feel like I weigh 1,200 pounds.
Right.
So you would just be smashed against,
right,
your seat. You actually would not survive very long.
Yeah, you would probably die pretty quickly. Wow. And the graph that they had on the show was crazy, because as you hear him and he's describing like what you just said, and then you see the graph go down, and then it literally just shoots up, and you're like, there's nothing on this planet that can do that quickly and be and be silent. And the thing is, every single person said the same thing, that it was silent. And as a small town, people can say, oh, well, they were talking and this and that. But I don't know how much that kind of weighs into it, because I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, oh, well, I said it was silent too. And you know what I mean? Like them kind of talking back and forth.
Yeah. What we know, because of the radar data, is the object was only 2 miles south of his home in the beginning.
Right.
And you will hear any aircraft at 2 miles. But in reality, it's even closer, right? Because when he comes back outside, now it's directly above his home. So, we're looking at less than 2 miles.
Right. Yeah.
So that it was silent, that is noteworthy.
Yeah.
The only thing that we have that can accelerate like that is like an anti-ballistic missile, which can reach, high G-forces very rapidly, but it can't sit still, right?
Yeah.
It can't float above your house and then take off.
And then go. Yeah.
Right. It's a ground launch missile.
Right.
We don't have anything that can sit in the sky, like an F-35, for example,
right,
and then just suddenly take off like that.
Right. Like a Hornet is a Hornet, right? The one that goes up.
But the F-35 does that. It's not the Hornet is the F-18.
Oh. Okay.
Yep. But the F-35, maximum acceleration in an F-35 might be 1.5 G-forces in terms of linear acceleration straight ahead.
Right.
Now he can bank, and he can get up to 7, 8, 9 G-forces, right?
Right.
But just to go straight ahead, he's not going to accelerate much beyond 1.5 G.
Especially from just sitting there and then going. Yeah, that's like, and also the exhaust from that would be, even if he would be insane.
Oh yeah. And anything we have that does something like that, you pretty much blown all of your fuel in that time period.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that's great. It's funny, man, because like everybody, not everybody, but every like legit claim, like Commander Fravor, everybody that's ever seen it or been around them or seen this kind of stuff, they always say that it is silent. And the way that it moves kind of just like defies gravity. And it's almost impossible to even like your brain. I feel like your brain can't even understand what it is because you've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people describe it sometimes as like you took a laser pointer and pointed at the wall and just flip it around and move it around. It's
Right.
moving, changing direction that quickly.
Right.
It's kind of like Leroy Gayton described the objects above him. They're just like randomly moving. Then all of a sudden they stop, and together they're just gone.
Right. Right. So, and all your research and everything that you've found and uncovered, what do you think? Like, what is your idea of what they are? Why are they here? Are they man-made potentially, and it's like military from either our country or another country, or are they kind of drones from other places? Are they interdimensional? Because I mean, I've heard cases of them going into water, and I mean, Commander Fravor literally, when he said he was flying his jet, the Navy pilot said he looked down and he could see the kind of like when a helicopter is over water, that ripple. And there's this giant bus size thing that's there. And then when he looks back down, it's submerged and it's gone. But the tic tac that he was following was hovering around it right above the water. So it's like, what is your thought on all this stuff?
So yeah, that's a good question. So I actually have a book that comes out April 2nd, and that's one of the things I talk about in the book. The book's called UFOs, and what I talk about is, my view of what this is. So I don't know where it comes from, right? I don't know its intention or purpose. I don't know any of that. What I do know from 17 years of study of this is it's nothing we built. It's not a black program, because any science we develop, it grows, steadily. Your science isn't here, then all of a sudden your science level's way up here. It's a gradual development of science. So it's nothing we built. The other thing I know is it physically exists. It's not a figment of someone's imagination. It's not a light that they're misconstruing as to what it may be. And the third thing is, or the second thing that I know other than it physically exists, is that it's intelligently controlled. And whatever that intelligence is well beyond our capabilities. So it's much more intelligent than us.
Why do you think that?
Well, anything that can accelerate like that takes a scientific technology to be able to suddenly accelerate, suddenly stop. And in addition to that, there are many cases where, we send up an aircraft and it reacts to the aircraft and leaves. So there's definitely indications of intelligence. And the case you gave is a good example of that with Commander Fravor, right? I mean, he's headed down towards this object that looks like this tic tac, and it's down near the ocean. So he's going down. And one thing he notes, and so does the pilots in the other aircraft that are staying up, is they see it point its nose towards him. And when it does that, then it begins moving towards him. And his reaction was, oh, it's seen me. It knows I'm headed towards it. And he's headed down, and they're like in this spiral coming down towards each other. And he decides, like, as he's coming down, he's just going to cut across and intercept it. And as soon as he does that, the object tilts and then it accelerates. And in less than 2 seconds, possibly 1 second, it's completely disappeared from sight. And, to put that in perspective, anyone who's gone to an air show, right? You see a military jet come, and he's not moving slow like these guys that are like Fravor was with this tic tac as they were headed down towards each other. In an air show, you're seeing a jet who's already, traveling at high speed. And as he approaches you and leaves, it takes that jet at least 10, 12 seconds before it disappears from sight. So you can imagine the speed and acceleration of any object that can move from your sight and disappear within 1 to 2 seconds.
Right. And also to your point about it being intelligent, it also either attempted or did jam his radar at one point. Right.
Yes, Spraber made that note. And then if you look at the image that's shown on the IR, the guy who later goes and videos the object, you'll see a 99.5 on the middle right area of the screen. And that indicates that he is not able to get a radar bounce back off the object. So one of two things happens. Either one would be his radar was malfunctioning, which there's no indication that had happened. The second would be that there's jamming, active jamming, intentional, like you mentioned. The third would be your radar is hitting an object that, for example, has a plasma around it. So your radar beam is getting scattered as it comes back to you. So that's somewhat similar to jamming, and it gives you a false return, which is why his radar says, 99.5. It's not getting that return.
Wow. What she said, I think he's like, that's an act of war, technically. Like, that's...
If it was a human craft, right. Because like if that was a Russian craft, that means the only way the Russian craft can do that is if he's jamming your radar signal.
So, and you mentioned plasma. So, like, that makes me think initially, I remember in Independence Day, the scene when they're trying to send the missiles, and it's just like hitting the outside, and it's just like, you see like the kind of like the plasma, like almost like armor, but it's invisible. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Like that's like kind of like coating?
Yeah. The plasma is basic. I mean, there's different ways you can form a plasma, but it's basically the air around the craft is highly electrified or heated, such that the atoms in the air are so excited that they've left the gas state and they're now in a plasma state.
What? That is crazy. Oh my God. Do you know why, like, a lot of the sightings also have been over, like, military? Not why. I mean, obviously no one knows why. But what are your thoughts on, like, a lot of military compounds all around the world, Russia, China, United States? There's been a lot of sightings around kind of like our defense areas.
Right. So some people have said, well, that's because you have more people at a military complex, looking out for aircraft and things like that, right?
Well,
but a number of guys at SCU actually done a study, and we've released reports on that on our website, which is explorescu.org. And what they did in the study is they said, okay, look, we'll take a military base that has nuclear weapons, and we're going to find a military base nearby that does not have nuclear weapons, right? And we'll take a civilian city nearby and look at it. So we use those two as controls, right? Mm-hmm. Because the military base has, without nuclear weapons, also has people out looking for aircraft and things like that. And when we compare the two, the site that has the nuclear weapons always has more UAP or UFO reports. So there does seem to be a definite link between nuclear power and UFOs or UAP.
Why?
Yeah, there we just have to speculate, right?
Right.
It's just going to be a guess. I mean, we could guess that they think that's interesting, right? What are these humans up to here?
Right.
And that's the same thing, right, with the nuclear carriers that we have. Mm. Like, this is the one that Fravor was involved with. He was with the USS Princeton, which is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. So all of our Navy, we call them strike groups. You have a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. You have a missile cruiser, like the USS Princeton, which was involved with the Nimitz. A couple of destroyers, usually an attack submarine, potentially, and then also supply ships. So that makes up a strike force for, each of these carrier strike groups.
Wow. So yeah, so that would make sense. If it's a nuclear power, then maybe they're attracted to that. It also, I mean, I always think it's like kind of, they're just like, okay, guys, like, slow down. Like, you guys are about to kill each other. Like, because the world's kind of crazy right now. So do you ever notice, or does your data ever show, like, when there's like times of war, times of kind of like humans being very close to doing something stupid to ourselves and annihilating us, do you ever see like a spike in sightings?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I've seen a spike in sightings, or that I can say definitely because of the war.
Right.
Because it's hard to say, because when you're in a war, there's a lot more activity, a lot more looking at the skies, and things like that.
Sure.
The one thing I can say is that in the modern UFO era began in 1942, which was in the middle of the Second World War. So a lot of people think it was 1947 with Kenneth Arnold. But if you just plot like number of reports here versus time, so it's, you just have a lot of noise in the 1920s and 30s. And then when World War II starts, about 1942, you get this uptick. And then it goes up even more by 1945. And then it just continues, growing after that.
Right. Are you familiar with the Younger Dryas theory?
No.
It's basically, what's his name? He was always on Joe Rogan. Oh my gosh, hold on. Oh my God, what's his name? Hold on. Oh my gosh, he has a Netflix documentary. It's called Ancient Apocalypse.
Is it a theory on why UFOs showed up, or?
No, well, it's kind of like, okay, so basically what happens is like, we said that, or we think that, like how the pyramids were built, right? There's like all of these things in time that we dated back to a certain time period. But like during that time period, there was like really only hunter-gatherers, right? There really wasn't any kind of like advanced human that would know how to do any of this stuff, right? And I mean, the fact that they say we can't redo or rebuild or remake the pyramids even today with all the stuff that we have. And then you find things in Turkey, was it Göbekli Tepe or whatever? I don't know how to say it. But it's basically like this underground thing that they found. They unearthed it, and it's like almost like a little city almost, and it has like all these crazy etches and like crazy designs, and then they dated that back further. There's like 15,000 years ago. And I say that because basically the idea is like we had this advanced civilization, and then we got struck by all of these meteorites, and it wiped out about 90% of the population. And then we kind of started over, and Neanderthal, we started coming back, and the Stone Age and all that stuff, and to industrial and all that stuff. But like, that's the idea of it. And there's always like a kind of like alien type feel to it, because when you look at some of the holographs, the things that are in Egypt and all around the world, there's people that look like they're in a freaking spaceship, and you're like, did they see that and they etch it into a stone type deal? And then now we're just kind of like seeing it again. And there's also like, how did these other civilizations build these things? Like if you look at the Sphinx out there, the one that like sits like at the base of the pyramids, the head proportioned is very small compared to the body. So they think that the body used to be a lion and not that, and that the head was much larger, but a different civilization built whatever was left of it and made it into the Sphinx head. And just stuff like that just kind of like correlates, and just makes me think of like, there's had to be some sort of assistance at some point in our history to get these things done. And could it be, these visitors that we have? And it's just a theory, but you should look into it. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Of course, I'm not an anthropologist or an archaeologist, but I mean, so far I've not seen any evidence that convinces me, that we had some type of, help as we went through our civilized history.
Right. Yeah. Graham Hancock.
Saying it's not possible, but I haven't seen.
Right. No, I know. And his name's Graham Hancock. He's actually a writer. He wasn't even an archaeologist or anything, but it's just interesting. But it's a good documentary on Netflix. But anyway, back to UFOs. What's your craziest study that you found? Like when you're getting your data, besides Dublin. I mean, Stephenville might be the craziest one. But what's the one that you were like, holy shit, this is legit?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, there's a number of them.
Oh, really?
That I've been involved with that were legit. I mean, one, Stephenville, when I said, I said, okay, yeah, this is pretty legit. The Nimitz case, I actually began investigating the Nimitz case a year before the New York Times article came out.
Oh, wow.
But when I investigate a case, I don't make it public, because as soon as, things go public, then you have people descending upon all the witnesses, asking them questions, and it actually changes, believe it or not, their memory starts to change a little bit as to what happens, because they're getting all these inputs, from media type people that says, did you see this? Did you see that? And, and they hear what other witnesses said. So when I investigated the Nimitz case, I don't know if you've ever heard of Gary Boris or Kevin Day.
No.
But
Kevin Day. He's a pilot, right?
Kevin Day was the senior chief on board the USS Princeton that was responsible for all the radar.
Yes.
And then Gary Boris was the guy. He was in the they call it the if I remember right, the fire. They call it fire control, but it's really about weaponry systems. And so he had access to the radar data. And when I interviewed them, they didn't know each other at that time, other than from long ago, right? They'd go, oh yeah, I can kind of remember this guy, right? But today, both those guys know each other very well,
right? Because
once the media got involved, they started talking to each other and all of that. But I confirmed, talking to them independently, that they both indicated that they detected these objects on radar moving at, a speed that was basically didn't even make sense. It was so fast. I mean, Kevin Day said the object moved somewhere between 28,000 and 80,000 feet in less than a second. And, whether his memory's right or wrong, and it was 80,000 feet or it was 28,000 feet, either way, the G forces involved there are just unbelievable.
Right. That's crazy. I think one of those guys came on Rogan one time, because he went on a kick with the Nimitz and all those guys, and he had the one guy that had the not the Tic Tac. There was another one. It was a one that looked like it was screaming across the screen. I forget what it was called.
Oh, that was from 2015.
Yeah.
There's one called the Go Fast.
Yeah.
And another one called the Gimbal.
Gimbal. That's right. Yeah. But I mean, those are all relatively similar things that you see on camera, like the TikTok rotating, and it's just or Tic Tac, not TikTok.
Yeah.
How come because I mean, I guess to the layman person, when I look at those camera footage, you think these fighter jets, you think they're going to kick back 4K imagery, and you could see this crazy stuff and details, but that's not possible, right?
Well, it just depends on what equipment they're using and how far away the object is. Like that video you see for the Nimitz incident. I mean, the craft that they have on video is probably 20 miles away, and it's infrared. And infrared doesn't give you nice, 4K type detail that you get with optical type cameras.
Right. Well, it's funny. I had Michael Shermer on here one time, and he's the ultimate skeptic. I mean, he doesn't believe in anything. It's always a coincidence. And it's funny because he was like talking. He's like, well, we have all these you have all these 4K cameras. People have iPhones and cameras in their pockets, and the footage you get from some of the things are awful. And I was like explaining to him, I'm like, I mean, have you ever have you ever tried to record an airplane? I mean, I live by Dulles Airport in DC, and I see planes low, high, mid, all kinds of ranges. And if I put my camera up top, I'm not close. You're not going to see a damn thing. Maybe an outline of an aircraft, but not a detailed description, on your camera. So I was trying to explain to him, and he's like, "Oh, that makes sense." And he was like, "Well, why does your camera look so good?" I'm like, "Well, first of all, I have all these lights. I'm 2 feet away from my camera.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going 30. I'm not going 500 miles an hour either."
That's right. And you might have an objective lens that's this big, depending on your setup.
Right.
And when I've got this cell phone here, I mean, look how tiny that lens is. And if an object's moving, just go out in the evening when a jet's flying over your house and see if you can take a picture of that jet and look at it and see how nice that picture looks. Because if his lights are on, all you're going to see some blurry lights as he goes by.
Exactly.
Because these cameras they're not equivalent, to the human eye, and not with this size of lens. Now you get a real high quality camera, they may be, but then you add to that when you see a UAP or UFO, you're not expecting it. Right. It's one thing for me to say, oh, okay, here comes the jet. I'm ready for it. I'm going to take my picture. Right. It's another thing when you see something that you've never seen before. Right. So the first thing that happens is you look at it, it's like, what am I looking at? Is this real? And your brain spends a few seconds going, am I imagining? Is this really here? And then, if it's moving a lot, then you're like mesmerized by this sudden movement. By the time you grab your phone and try to take a picture, unless it decided to stay there, it's already gone and it's too late.
Right. I remember the one in your show that you were on, the guy, the hunter that was out in he was like hunting his rifle, and he was able to zoom in on it in like broad daylight, and how the documentary plays is like he must have seen something, and whoever was kind of scaring him to not talk or to talk, whatever it was, they must have known something. Because I mean, I feel like he's got a scope, so he probably saw a lot better than like if you were just looking with the naked eye,
Yeah, I think. Are you talking about the barbell case? There are 3 hunters. They're up in Canada, and they see this object that's shaped like a barbell, just floating in the sky above them. And so the first thing he does is he takes out his Motorola. He had a Motorola camera. I mean, flip phone, or the type of phone he had at the time. And so he's trying to take a picture with his phone, but his phone's not working. It's like in a boot up mode. So it's like he had turned it off and now it's turning back on. So he puts his phone down and he grabs his Sony camera, the one he just finished taking photos of these black bear that they had shot. So he turns on his Sony camera, and this object's only about 400 feet away from him. And it's about 100 feet across. So it's big, and it's nighttime, but the object has this huge blue plasma all around it. So it's lighting itself. So there's plenty of light for him to get a camera picture. He turns on the camera. As soon as he turns it off, it kicks itself off. So he turns it on again, it turns itself off. And what was happening, and this guy is actually a scientist who works and has contracts for the Department of Defense. And I actually flew up and met him because I wanted to, make sure he was for real. And he was. Wow. I mean, he had engineers that worked for him. He had his own operation. He even gave me a tour of a DOD, or Department of Defense, plant that was manufacturing some of the products that he had patents on, that he, made, that the DOD made of his. So what he was pretty sure was happening was that whatever was causing the plasma around this object was, generating an electrical field, and that his camera was turning itself off, so that it didn't get the electronics within it didn't get fried, which may have been what happened with his cell phone.
Right.
And he also had a Motorola field camera, right? So it's kind of like a walkie-talkie type setup. And the electronics in that was fried. It wasn't usable again. Okay, so with the story, he takes out his hunting rifle because he's got a scope on it, and he wants to look at this real carefully. So he's actually looking at the object using the 9X scope on his hunting rifle. And the funny thing is, the two guys with him, his hunting partners, one of them goes, shoot it.
Okay.
And he was like, I'm not going to shoot something I don't even know what it is.
Right.
And so as the story goes on, this object begins to move away. And when it gets a quarter mile away from him, it's a barbell that's just slowly rotating as it moves. So this is totally non-aerodynamic.
Right.
So it's moving away. When it gets a quarter mile away, it dawns on him. He said, well, maybe it's far enough away now that it won't interfere with my camera. So then he turns his video camera, which was a Sony again. He turns it back on, and now it stays on. It doesn't kick off, right? And so he starts recording, and you can hear the audio of the recording, but the video was still scrambled. So the audio portion was operable, but not the video. And he still has this camera. He's got it locked in a safe, and he won't give it to anyone. But when I went out and visited with him, we put the camera on a oscilloscope to just look at the traces.
Ooh.
And you could see, how the camera was operating, fine when he was filming the black bear.
Right.
But as soon as he started, later on when he's trying to film this object, he's getting all of this interference, and he picks up a particular frequency on his camera in the audio portion of it that he thinks is caused by the object. And he thinks that frequency's probably just a consequence of this plasma that's, all around the object.
What the hell? I never even heard that story. I was talking about the guy in the documentary in your episode, the hunter that was in Dublin, that like the FBI was.
Okay,
like,
I know. Yeah,
but that was amazing.
Yeah, that was Ricky Sorrell.
Yeah. They like kind of scared him into like not talking.
So Ricky,
crazy.
To jump back to that, Corey, I've met Ricky a couple of times, and he's a real believable kind of guy. He's a big old country boy.
Right.
Well, this is in Texas, but I grew up in Oklahoma. He could have been in Oklahoma,
right?
Too. He's kind of down to earth,
right?
And so he's telling us the story, and actually, that object that he saw this huge object above him. He was out hunting, wasn't looking for UFOs or anything. So he's out hunting, and all of a sudden, he notices it's kind of dark. It's getting dark all around him. And that's when he looks up, and he sees this giant craft that's basically blocking out most of the sky, which is why it was looking darker. And the thing that happens is, it's very quick. He just looks up at it. And the next thing he knows, this object has just, zipped away. And his first thought was, how did it do that without just a rush of wind, sucking him along with it, right?
Right.
Any object that size that suddenly moves at a high rate of speed, it's going to cause a huge vacuum behind it as it pulls the air with it.
Right.
So anyway, that's what happens to him. So he goes to work the next day. And remember, this is 2 weeks before Stephenville.
Oh, yeah.
He tells all his buddies, and, they're just laughing and telling him he's crazy. They think he's trying to pull their legs or whatever. So 2 weeks goes by. He's at work. And one of his friends at work comes up and he says, well, you weren't lying to us after all. And they show him the front page of the Stephenville paper that was talking about all the sightings that had happened.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of how he got introduced into that world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. What about the, I know we're kind of jumping around, but the, what's it, the movie, The Fire in the Sky? Remember that guy? Was it Travis Walton, I think?
Yeah, Travis Walton.
Yeah.
That's an interesting story. I don't know for sure what happened there. I mean, he claims that he was, taken into the craft and then dropped somewhere else. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. That's his story.
Well, his friends thought his friends were about to be go on trial for his disappearance and his murder. The people that he was with, he was gone for a week. Yeah. It's crazy.
It's an interesting.
It is interesting
story.
It is. He came on Joe Rogan too. I listened to him. I was like, man, this guy sounds crazy as hell, but also so believable.
Yeah, he sounds very believable, and his as to what happened at that moment, the object being above them, his friends corroborate that.
Right.
They just don't know what happened later.
Right. So as far as seeing the sightings, when you see abductions, do you think that those are physical things where people are taken, or sometimes when you dream, we could be, that could be a state of kind of interaction with other things like that, right?
It could be a possible. I'm sure it's a combination of multiple things. The question is, are there any of them that are absolute true abductions, right? A physical abduction. And not being a psychologist, I always stay away from that.
Right.
I stay more with the hard science, but it's a possibility. I mean, it could be real. And the other possibility is, I mean, if you think about it, if you have if you're dealing with a more advanced intelligence, theoretically, they could put the entire abduction sequence in your head, and it never physically happens to you. But as far as you're concerned, it happened.
Right.
That's a possibility. But of all and these aren't abduction. This is not an abduction story, but the most interesting one that I've ever seen is the one that was in 1992, and I believe it was in Zimbabwe, where the school children see this. I don't know if you've seen that.
It's on the Encounters. It's on the Encounters.
Yeah, it's in Encounters also.
Yeah.
And you see that, and they all draw, this object that lands, and they see these little guys come out of it. But to me, the most interesting part of it, what makes it so believable, is I do this a lot. You turn off the sound. For anyone that's listening, watch that show again. Turn off the sound and just watch the faces of the kids. Because when you do that, it allows your brain to focus on their body language, and you're not hearing these adults talk or the kids talk. And when you look at their body, I mean, this one poor little girl, she's just going like this all through her discussion. She's just wringing her hands. And it's hard for me not to believe that something definitely happened there.
Right. For them to have that kind of physical reaction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because when they're getting interviewed, they're taking them back to that moment. So it's kind of
yeah.
They're physically back there as well. Totally makes sense. Absolutely. Damn, man. What's the, okay, so the book, UFOs, what's it called? UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. Can you kind of talk about that for a second?
Yeah, the book comes out April 2nd. I've got one advance copy of it there, so it probably looks upside down on your screen.
No, it's good.
But the book is, it really surmises, everything I've learned in 17 years on the book. So I cover everything from, a little bit of brief history, but it's written for someone who may not know anything about UFOs, as well as for someone who has studied the subject quite a bit, right? And like one of the things that I talk about is how and why did we change the name from UFOs to UAP?
Yeah.
So I talk about that in the book. I talk about you've probably heard people, skeptics will say, oh, it's anecdotal data, which means it's just someone's testimony. It's not hard evidence. And I talk about that. And I talk about why anecdotal evidence can be very valuable information. And the other thing I talk about is people will always say, well, how do you do the experiment? I want to repeat an experiment on UFOs, right? So if you think about how science works, have you ever heard the term hard science and soft science?
Yes. Yep.
So a little background on that. So like my field's chemistry is considered a hard science because it's repeatable, right? You can do it over and over. It's easy to repeat. And of course, and it's the hard scientists that came up with this term, hard and soft science. Is kind of an insult to the other sciences, which to me is incorrect. There should not be an insult to psychologists, sociologists, any of the soft science. It's because they're still a science.
Right.
The soft part represents how you learn about something, right? So if you think about biology, for example, as compared to like chemistry or physics, if you're dealing with like some bacteria and you say, hey, I want to repeat your experiment with what you did with this bacteria, if I know the temperature, the kind of food you're giving the bacteria, and all the conditions, I can repeat that experiment over and over. But take a pack of dogs. You can, stand in front of the pack of dogs and make certain motions, and they may react to you a certain way. You can go do that in front of a different pack of dogs, and the end result may not be too good.
Right.
So, and the reason for this difference is because intelligence is being involved. Same thing when you're dealing with people. That's why psychology and sociology are such soft sciences, because the intelligence of the individual makes the experiment non-repeatable. I can't guarantee how John Doe will react to a certain statement compared to Bill Smith. It's not a repeatable experiment.
Right.
And that's because there's intelligence involved. So now imagine that you're dealing with something much more intelligent than us. So how in the world would we expect that we could repeat that experiment? Yeah. If anything, it could be doing the experiment on us, right? It could be in control of the experiment. It's kind of like, imagine if you're doing an experiment with a monkey and we're the monkey, we're the chimpanzee.
That's right, man. That's what I'm saying. Like, we are the ant farm.
Right. And so the chimpanzee's there, and that's us, trying to figure out, how do I do this experiment on these UFOs? And the UFO, of course, is this doctor in a lab coat, right? He's doing an experiment on chimpanzees. Let's see, what am I going to do? Oh, I know. I'm going to take his chopsticks that he was eating with, and I'm going to take them off his plate and put them down here and see if he understands what I mean by that. And so the doctor just looks at the stupid chimpanzee and takes his chopstick back and continues doing what he wants to do, right?
Right.
It's like, it's a totally different issue if you're dealing with something that's more intelligent than you.
Yeah.
And we don't want to think about that, right? That's just us as humans. We don't like to think of the possibility that we're not in control and that something's more intelligent than us.
100%. And I agree with that, what you just said, so much, because I mean, just like even like outer space and how many galaxies and all this, it's like almost impossible for us to be alone. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be something else out there. But you're right, man. Like, it could totally be we are the experiment, and all these things that we really can't explain are just maybe them tuning in to seeing how we're doing. Oh, they're about to nuke each other. Let's make an appearance, like that's kind of where I was getting to when I was talking about the military stuff. But that makes that, I mean, I don't know, man. It's just like, it's so fun to speculate too.
Yeah, we always want to be the center of everything, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's why Copernicus, it was like, okay, the Earth's the center of the universe.
Right.
And then from there we went to, okay, maybe the Earth is not the center, but the solar system's the center.
Right.
And we were where at a point in time. And then after we got past that, it was like, well, okay, maybe the solar system's not the center, but we're right in the middle of we're in the middle of the Milky Way galaxy. Well, today we know we're not in the middle of it. Yeah. We're off in the left arm here, 80% of the distance out from the Milky Way galaxy. Right. But so the only thing we have left is, well, okay, there may, most scientists today agree there's probably life within our galaxy. But so all we have left is, well, we're the most intelligent life on Earth and nothing else can get here. So as long as those two statements are true, I'm in good shape.
Yeah. Which clearly things can get here, if not already here. You know what I mean? The other thing too, I was going to ask you about, what are your thoughts on the ocean? Because I mean, I think we've discovered, or we know more about the outer space than we do our own ocean, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. We have not really. We don't know as much about our own oceans we do about outer space. That's probably a good statement.
That is terrifying. Well, so why? Why not? Why not?
Well, because I mean, we can use radar to try to map the oceans, right?
Right.
And we can go up into space much more easily because at the depths of the ocean, the pressures are so enormous that it's very difficult to send anything down that survives the pressures, near the bottoms of the ocean.
They're hanging out down there, aren't they? They're down there.
Who knows? No way to know.
I'm just kidding. Last question.
Showing up on our radar imagery of the ocean.
Oh yeah. Could you imagine? There's like a whole city of them down there. Last question. I'll let you get out of here. What's your thoughts on like the government involved in this? Because there's been a lot of involvement with the government in the last couple of years. A lot of politicians coming out and saying like, listen, guys, we also don't know what these are. They are unidentified for sure. They're not ours. We're pretty sure they're not Russia's or China's. Why is that? And kind of what's your stance on the government being involved? Have they always been involved? Have they always been looking into this kind of stuff, since Roswell? What's your thought on that?
So my thought on that is, yes, you're correct. The government has always been involved. And my view has always been that the government knew very little more than what civilians that have researched the subject have known. So I've always felt the government was in a situation where it was like, we don't know what this is. We know it exists. But in the case of the Air Force, for example, our job is to have control of our skies. Well, we know we don't really, because there are these objects that pop in and out, but they don't seem to cause any problems. I don't want to have to answer to the public and Congress constantly about what are these things popping in and out of our skies and why don't you guys do something about it? So I'll just, keep it under the cover and not think about it. Have you ever seen Hogan's Heroes?
What's that?
It's an old-time movie. And there was always this, or it was not a movie, but a series. And there was this German sergeant who was the head of the prison camp. And he would always he'd go, I see nothing, I hear nothing, I know nothing.
Right.
And to me, that's the way our military basically responds to UAP. Now, having said that, in the last 2 to 3 years, right, there's been David Grush and others who've come out and said, hey, we've got craft and alien bodies even, right? And they've made those claims. Now, to me, I mean, that's not something you can answer with science. That's like a black and white question. Either they're telling the truth or they're not telling the truth, right? It's either true or not true.
Right.
And the only way you get that answer is Congress has to go investigate it. If David Grush saw some government documents that document, a craft that we've had and work that's been done on it, then it's just a question of him telling Congress, here are the documents, here's where they exist, you guys can go look at them. And then Congress, of course, has to tell the military, you guys are going to turn over these documents or else, right? But it's never that easy. The military can push back, right, a lot. So
Right.
that's kind of a new aspect to your whole question about how much does the government know?
Right. It seems like they've kind of, like, to your point, have always done maybe a little more than the general public, just because they have the technology and the and the need to know. But you're right. It definitely seems like, because sometimes these hearings and stuff you see are like, they look kind of clueless too. Like, they literally don't know. And I definitely think most politicians are liars and stuff like that. But they have no real reason to lie about this other than, keeping it away from the public, unless if it's something that's like, we've seen some crazy shit and, like, we know that, like, it'll just cause, like, mass hysteria. That's the only reason why I think they would keep it under wraps. But that's crazy. All right. So how can people find you if you want them to?
The best way to find me is, they could go to the SCU website, which is explorescu.org. And if they, I could send you a link to give you information on my book that's coming out April 2nd. So I'll send you that link, Corey, and you can put it in.
Please do. I'll put your Twitter and stuff like that in the description below.
Yeah, my Twitter site is good.
Perfect. Or sorry, X.
Sorry. Right. X.
X. Yes, not Twitter.
Like SpaceX.
Yeah.
Twitter X.
Exactly. There you go. Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it, taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. I enjoyed the conversation.
Same. Well, that's another episode for the E4 Explicit Podcast. We'll see you next time.